Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my toasty warm backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. How is everybody doing today? I hope you're well, I hope you're happy, I hope you're healthy, and I hope you're having some fun. Today we're going to talk about an animal that strikes fear into most people, and there can be some good reasons to be afraid of them. But I hope by the end that we can all have a bit more respect for them, and if we ever come across them, we treat them in a safe and respectful way. Today, in our critter chat, we're going to talk about rattlesnakes. I remember as a kid being absolutely terrified of rattlesnakes. On occasion, we would go visit the national parks of southern Utah. I grew up in Utah, and I always thought that anywhere in the desert would be where a rattlesnake would live. As an adult, I moved to Phoenix, Arizona, and rattlesnakes were often a topic of conversation in and around the community I lived and worked in. I worked at the Phoenix Zoo, and although we had rattlesnakes on exhibit, we didn't really have rattlesnakes that were wild on zoo grounds. And through all this time in hiking in many national parks in southern Utah, vacationing at Lake Powell, hiking in and around the Phoenix area, I never saw a rattlesnake in the wild. Then I moved to Los Angeles, and the first wild rattlesnake I saw was at the Los Angeles Zoo. And it was a wild rattlesnake. It wasn't one that belonged to the zoo. It didn't escape from the zoo. It was one that wandered to the zoo from the hills outside. And I was a bit scared. I was in a truck and I was still scared. But I knew that it was possible that they would come into zoo property, and we had a very excellent trained reptile staff who could help relocate them. Now, earlier today, I posted a video of a rattlesnake. That is a southwestern speckled rattlesnake, and I filmed that video. That is a wild rattlesnake. That is a rattlesnake that I saw at Joshua Tree National Park here in Southern California. I filmed that video almost 3 years ago in 2017, at my first time that I visited Joshua Tree National Park. And I'll talk a little bit more about that snake in particular in a moment. But let's talk a bit about rattlesnakes. Who are they? Where are they? Why are they special? Why are they important? And how can we avoid getting bit by one? Rattlesnakes are a family of snakes. They are actually divided into two different groups of rattlesnakes. But there are about 30 species of rattlesnakes. Depending on who you ask, that's going to vary a little bit because science is still figuring things out, and we still sometimes figure out new genetic ways of testing that may say, oh, this kind of rattlesnake and this kind of rattlesnake that we thought were maybe the same species are actually two different species. Rattlesnakes are entirely in the Americas, so North and South America, but they are most heavily concentrated. The most number of species is actually the desert southwest of the United States. So that's going to be states like California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, a bit into Texas and Colorado, and the area of northern Mexico. Inside the state limits of Arizona actually has the highest concentration of any rattlesnakes, or of the most rattlesnake species. They have 13 different species native to Arizona. That doesn't mean that you have to be in the desert southwest to find a rattlesnake. I actually did a search to see what states don't have a rattlesnake species, and I was a bit surprised by my findings. There are three U.S. states that don't have native population of rattlesnakes. Alaska, that makes sense because Alaska is usually pretty cold. Snakes don't like cold, they need it warm, so that made sense. Hawaii, that made sense too. There's not a lot of reptiles in general in Hawaii, and certainly not rattlesnakes. They're far from the mainland, so that would also make sense. The third one surprised me a little bit, and then I thought about it a little more, and it didn't surprise me as much. That's Rhode Island. Rhode Island's a really tiny state, and throughout much of Rhode Island is populated by people. And so people effectively eliminated rattlesnakes from Rhode Island. There's not a lot of wild spaces left in that state, so there aren't rattlesnakes in Rhode Island anymore. There used to be. Now, the nearby states still have rattlesnakes, so it's possible you still could see a rattlesnake in Rhode Island if it made its way in from like Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, any of those areas close by that would have rattlesnakes. In the US, there are rattlesnakes in the rest of the states, with most common species being either the timber rattlesnake or the prairie rattlesnake. Those cover a lot of the eastern states and the Midwestern states. In the western US, we have more variety of species, with usually 4 or 5 species, sometimes 6 or 8 in most of the states. Now, rattlesnakes, the biggest is actually a rattlesnake called the eastern diamondback. This snake is prevalent to the southeast portion of the United States, with big populations in areas like Florida, Georgia, Alabama. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes can reach up to 8 feet in length and can weigh about 10 pounds. So they are the biggest of all rattlesnakes. There is a western diamondback rattlesnake that is not much smaller, and that's in the western states. The smallest rattlesnake depends on how we measure smallest. So size-wise, length-wise, is the twin-spotted rattlesnake. It measures in at just 12 inches. So an adult's only going to be this big, pretty little. For the lightest weight rattlesnake is one that's just a little bit longer but skinnier, called the ridge-nosed rattlesnake. It tops out between 3 and 4 ounces. So it's just a little guy as well. All rattlesnakes are venomous. And that means if they bite you, it can cause some big problems. Usually that just means that it's going to be very painful. It may cause you to be sick, and in some cases it has caused death in people, although that's pretty rare from a rattlesnake bite. We'll talk a little bit more about bites in a minute. First of all, with rattlesnakes, they are a reptile. And so that means that we know that their bodies are covered with scales, right? Reptiles all have scaly bodies. Their babies come from eggs, and they are ectothermic or cold-blooded, relying on outside sources to heat their bodies up. So with rattlesnakes, babies come from eggs gets a new twist on it. Rattlesnakes are one of the species that is called ovoviviparous, which means that they are technically in eggs, but the eggs don't leave the mom's body. So she kind of is pregnant with eggs inside of her for about 90 days. The correct term for that is called gravid. So she's gravid. She's not pregnant, she's gravid. She has eggs inside of her for about 90 days, so about 3 months. And then the babies will hatch from the eggs, and then shortly after hatching, they come outside the mom and are born. And during that time, they actually still have a little covering over the top of them. It looks kind of like clear cellophane, and then they bite their way through that and wiggle out. And they are pretty much on their own from that time. She doesn't take care of them at all, but you'll never find like a rattlesnake egg nest, because they don't do that. The eggs stay inside the mom the entire time. So they kind of have a live birth, although they came from eggs that are inside. It's a very complicated thing. Snakes are not the only animals that do that. There's also some sharks that do that. So we'll talk about that in a future episode, talking more about sharks. So back to being cold-blooded or relying on outside temperatures to heat them up. Most rattlesnakes, especially in the desert Southwest, in areas like where I live in California and Arizona and Nevada, typically a rattlesnake's tolerance for heat is about 90 degrees. Once it gets to 90 degrees, it's usually going to look for a place that's a little cooler. So a cooler place for a rattlesnake is going to be under like some leaves or a shady area near a little stream, maybe under a rock, maybe under some logs. things like that. And if it's a hot day, today it's 95 degrees at my house. So if there were rattlesnakes around here, which I've never seen a snake in my yard of any kind, yet alone a rattlesnake, so I don't think there's a rattlesnake around. But if there were, they would be hiding right now because this is too warm for them. So typically on a hot day at 90 or above, rattlesnakes are going to switch to being nocturnal. They'll come out at night to hunt for their food. Their ideal temperature range is between like the low 70s to 90. That's when they're going to be most active. So here in Southern California, we actually have a lot of rattlesnakes around. We need to be a little cautious moving forward and into summer, as it's going to be good temperatures for them, especially in the mornings. A snake, when it wakes up in the morning, if it's been a cool night or even into like the 60s like last night, it's going to want to find a sunny spot and heat up. So it would lay out in the open on a dirt patch or on a nice rock where it can catch some sun and heat up until it can start going about its day. They will usually kind of seek out some prey opportunities. Rattlesnakes are specialists in eating rodents. So they're really looking for things like mice and rats, maybe some squirrels, maybe something bigger like a rabbit or baby rabbits. And occasionally they'll go after birds, especially birds that live more on the ground, things like quail. On occasion, they'll eat some other reptiles like little lizards that they may come across, but they really specialize in rodents. And especially when it gets a little warm out, like above 90 degrees, and they switch to hunting at night, they have a very special sense that helps them to hunt. So rattlesnakes have some of the same senses that we have. So they have good vision, not particularly great vision at night. They don't have any sense of hearing. So although they make noise to scare off other dangers to them, they can't really hear. We had a call coming in. Hopefully we're back. So they can't really hear anything, but to make up for that, they can feel vibrations of things around them. And then like all snakes, they flick their tongue out to kind of taste the air. And then when they bring their tongue back into their mouth, they push it against the roof of their mouth, and they have a very special organ in the roof of their mouth called the Jacobson's organ. And with that, they're able to kind of taste the molecules out in the air, and that helps them to focus in on some of their prey as well. But they even have something even more highly developed. On a rattlesnake's head, you may notice two little pits, two little holes. They kind of look like nostrils. But what those are is heat-seeking pits. They can actually detect body temperature of mammals. Mammals are warm-blooded, so are birds. And so we're usually warmer than our surroundings, especially if a rattlesnake's not active above 90 degrees. If it's less than 90 degrees, a mammal or a bird is gonna stick out because we're warmer than 90 degrees. And it's going to be able to detect that from those pits on the front of its face. If you've ever heard of a snake called a pit viper, that's a whole group of snakes. Rattlesnakes are part of that. So they can sense heat through the front of their face. And in the dark, they will use that to find their prey. And they'll typically set up near a trail or a nest or an area where rodents are moving about. And they'll kind of just curl up and wait. They're an ambush predator. That means they're gonna kind of hide and wait for the food to come to them. And then they're gonna strike. When they strike, they're gonna bite. And their front teeth are hollow, and they have a venom gland in the top of their mouth. They're gonna inject some venom into their prey, and their prey's not gonna make it too far before their prey dies. Because they're little, the venom of a rattlesnake will kill their prey. And then they follow it, tasting with their tongue, and then they get to it and they eat it. Pretty simple lifestyle that they live. Adult rattlesnakes typically eat every 10 days to 2 weeks, depending on the time of the year. Younger snakes will eat a little more often. usually at least every week, maybe a little more than that if the food they're getting is small, like a baby mouse. When rattlesnakes are first born, they do not have their rattle. That comes and grows with them as they get older. So at about a week old, after they've been born from their mom and come out of their egg casings, they shed their skin at about a week old. And when their skin sheds for the first time, it leaves a little bit on the end that is made of keratin. Keratin, again, is what our fingernails and our hair is made out of. And rattlesnakes' rattles are made of keratin. So that's the first segment of the rattles that will be on their tails. So they get that at about a week or maybe 2 weeks old in a colder climate. And then typically they add a new segment whenever they shed their skin. They typically shed about every year. So they typically add a new segment to their rattle every year. However, those rattles can break off and then grow new ones. So it's not necessarily a way of aging how old a rattlesnake is, but it's a good indicator. So if it has 7 links or segments on its rattle, it's most likely at least 7 years. Let's see, what else were we going to talk about? Yeah, so rattlesnake venom, it is capable of killing people under some circumstances. Typically, that means that the venom has to be a lot of venom injected into you near a very vital organ. So that would be your heart, possibly your brain or your lungs. That's not where most people get bit by rattlesnakes, so it usually doesn't result in death. The venom has to kind of move through your body to get to the vital organs to cause major issues. Most people who get bit by rattlesnakes get bit on the hands. Most people who get bit by rattlesnakes are men, 90%. Most people who get bit by rattlesnakes are men who are between the ages of 20 and 30 years old. More than half of the people who get bit by rattlesnakes out in the wild are men between ages of 20 to 30 years old who have a high blood alcohol level. It's usually guys who have been drinking that get bit by rattlesnakes. So that tells us that it's probably not the snake's fault in any way, shape, or form. The best thing to do if you see a rattlesnake is to hold still, back off, and watch and see where it goes. It is not coming after you. They are not an aggressive species. They don't even want to bite you. Their venom is used to kill their prey. You are not their prey. It's not trying to kill you. So it doesn't want to bite you. It will only bite you if it feels that is its last resort. If it's scared, it's going to try to get away. But if you've cornered it, then it's going to defend itself. If it's already cornered because it's limited space along a trail on like a big rock on the edge of the trail and it doesn't have a lot of places to go, it's going to feel threatened and then it may bite. They usually rattle before they bite. They don't always. And there's actually a couple of species of rattlesnakes that don't have rattles. They are species that have developed on islands, and they don't have rattles because there's not a lot of big things that live on the island. The rattle is typically used to warn large animals that the snake is there. And if there's not a large animal, they don't need a rattle, so they don't have them. Typically, most other rattlesnakes do have rattles, and they will usually rattle if they feel threatened. And they will use that as a warning to like, hey, I'm here, don't step on me. That's really what they're trying to avoid, is being stepped on by something bigger than them. So that could be a deer, that could be a coyote, that could be a person, that could be a horse, that could be a lot of things. Most commonly, rattlesnake bites that are reported to like game and fish and such are either people or dogs. That's because as people are hiking with dogs, if you don't have your dog on a leash and if your dog is very curious, it will usually have its nose near the ground and it will usually get close to see what things are. and that often results in the dog getting bit by the snake. There are special classes taught to help your dogs avoid rattlesnakes. Sorry, I've got a bee right by me. And I learned from our bee critter chat last week to not swat at bees because that just makes him angry. So I'm gonna let him kind of go his way. Okay, bee. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, so with most rattlesnakes, I am happy to report that they are not endangered. There are a couple of species that are endangered, one of which is on a little island down in the Gulf of Mexico, or sorry, the Gulf of Baja, the Gulf of California, off of Baja, Mexico. That island is called Catalina, not to be confused with Catalina Island that's in the United States. But the rattlesnake on Catalina also does not have a rattle. This bee needs to just leave me alone. Hopefully it's gone. Okay. The Santa Catalina rattlesnakes are critically endangered because they are an island species and they have a limited range. And yeah, we're gonna just take a step forward, see if this bee will go away. But there are some people doing some really good work to help out the Catalina rattlesnakes. Okay, bee, go away, please. I don't have what you want. Go find a flower. Here. Sorry. So there are some zoos that are doing some really great work to help out the endangered species or threatened species of rattlesnakes. Specifically the San Diego Zoo and the Los Angeles Zoo have done a lot of great work in helping learn more about rattlesnakes, helping identify species that need help, like the Santa Catalina rattlesnake in Mexico. There's also 2 other Mexican species of rattlesnakes that are threatened, as well as a species in Brazil. The species in Brazil holds particular interest for humans because they have analyzed the toxins in its venom, and they have identified that its venom can be used to make a drug similar to morphine that is actually more effective and has less side effects than morphine. And so they're looking in ways that they have tried to help make this new drug better than morphine from rattlesnake venom as a painkiller for humans. So there are many good reasons to protect rattlesnakes. The number 1 reason to help protect rattlesnakes, though, is that they're an important part of the ecosystem. They do a lot of really great things in helping control rodent populations. If you've ever been in a place where there's a lot of mice or rats or gophers or squirrels, most likely there's an overabundance of those animals because there aren't enough snakes around to eat them. Speaking of snakes, one of the snakes that is out and about is also called a king snake. A king snake is a local snake species that is in much of the United States. And one thing that's really amazing about a king snake is it eats other snakes. And it can eat rattlesnakes, and it is immune to their venom. So a king snake is a very good snake to have around because it also will help control any populations of rattlesnakes that get too high. So always with any snake, please just back off and give it its space. So that brings me back to the snake in the video that I posted earlier today at Joshua Tree National Park. I was in Joshua Tree exploring. I pulled up to a trailhead where there's a good trail system that explores an area called Skull Rock. It's a beautiful area. I parked my car. I took about 5 steps. I heard something come out of the bushes, and it was that beautiful southwestern speckled rattlesnake. So it was really near the trailhead right next to the parking lot, in an area with a lot of people around and about. I knew a bit about rattlesnakes by that time, and what was best to be done was to give that snake some space, which I tried to do very much, but I also wanted to film it because I thought it was very beautiful and it was a fun wildlife sighting for me, as I had never seen that species before at all. But I also made sure that I stayed in the area so I could let anybody know who was coming along the trail that, hey, there's a rattlesnake here. Please be careful, but also don't hurt the snake. I didn't want people to get hurt. I didn't want the snake to get hurt. And so I stuck around until it moved back off into the bushes and went on its rattlesnake way. During my time in the zoo industry, I've never been directly responsible for taking care of rattlesnakes. I am not the best reptile person, but I have had some time interacting with them a bit. Specifically at the Phoenix Zoo, when I was working in education at the zoo, we did a public feeding of our rattlesnakes. I believe it was on Tuesdays, it may have been Thursdays. I don't remember what day of the week it was. But during that time, I would be an educator standing on the people side of the exhibit, talking to guests while the zookeepers went through and fed our collection of rattlesnakes. I think we had like 6 different exhibits of them with multiple species in each exhibit, representing the many species of rattlesnake that live in Arizona. It was always really exciting to me because as soon as they would open the door, the rattlesnakes would come to, they would wake up, and they would be very alert. They would usually be very excited and hungry. They would usually coil, and they would rattle. If you've never heard a rattlesnake noise, check later today on Facebook. I'll post a link so you can hear one. It sounds a little like this. I don't do it very good. If you can see the vibrations when I do that with my tongue, you can also almost feel that with a rattlesnake rattling its tail as well, especially in a zoo setting where they're usually behind glass. When a rattlesnake is really rattling, you can see the vibrations of their tail, and you can almost see and feel the vibration in the glass. It is significantly louder than I ever expected it to be, and I really enjoyed being an educator during the rattlesnake feedings and helping people understand that rattlesnakes are not looking to hurt people in any way, and they're actually very important for their ecosystem. During my time at the LA Zoo, I was training to be a zookeeper before I ever became one, and I did spend some time with the reptile keepers, but in working with venomous reptiles as a volunteer, learning at that point, I was always just on the spectator side, the guest side, when the rattlesnakes were fed. So I watched them get fed multiple times. I never was involved in doing much actual husbandry for them because I was not certified nor trained to do so. But the LA Zoo, the San Diego Zoo, the Phoenix Zoo all have excellent collections. If you are interested in rattlesnakes, they have very many species on exhibit, and it's really great to see the different color palettes and also the patterns that different rattlesnakes have. I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you on our Critter Chat today. I hope you were less distracted by the bee than I was, and I hope that you have learned something about rattlesnakes. And if not, then watch this again and see if you can't find some way to appreciate them a little bit. Until tomorrow, take care of yourself, be happy, be healthy, have fun. Bye.